Hey everyone, it's time for part 2 of the 2.14 tier list. In today's, well, I've already made 2 videos today, but in this episode, we're going to be going through Survivor, Low Beta, and High Beta. Um, yeah, so this is what I'll call the low tiers. It's like the last tier of the series I made. So yeah, let's get started. Obviously, these are all my opinions. It's unboosted, um, and it's PvP only, no raids. And of course, it's my opinion. I base this off of what I think is best, based on my experiences and stuff. Anyways, we're gonna start Survivor going alphabetically, and the first one here is Amphi Scion. Amphi's it's basically just a fast-ish but frail fierce that has pretty mediocre damage output. It does have a good crit chance and is diesel immune and no escape's nice, but generally it just doesn't have the oomph behind it to be good. Next is Ankylosaurus. This is an epic. A very tanky one, but it doesn't really do much. It's got diesel immune, and it's got mediocre speed, low damage, good health, and a good amount of armor. But it just has a bunch of shields and then spear vulnerability, so it's not very good. It's still a weak epic, although I would out of the epics in this tier, I would say it's probably the best, maybe the second best actually after Monogonodon's buff, but we'll get to that. Anyways, Apotasaurus. Apotasaurus' change might be temporary because it got a buff in 2.14 that was like, and Ludia said it was a mistake, but they haven't fixed it yet, so I'm hoping it's here to stay because it really needed it. If it didn't get this buff, it would be in Carcass. I forgot to turn off my phone's volume. Okay, whatever. So yeah, basically what they did with it in 2.14 is a shadow buff. They basically gave it 200 more damage, some distraction resistance, and group decelerating impact instead of group decelerating strike, which makes this thing a lot better than it was before. Yeah, this thing it's still not very good. It's still pretty like below average common, but it is way better than before. It's not absolutely terrible like it used to be. Um, yeah, Apotasaurus. Way better than before. Alright, Bionics Gen 2. Bionics Gen 2 is probably one of the weakest creatures in this tier. It's basically Irritator, but better. It's slower, has less crit chance, and a bit less health, and the same resistances, but it has a multiplier, so I think that makes a difference. But it still kind of sucks. Next is Dimetrodon Gen 2. Um, Dimetrodon Gen 2, I'd say, is one of the better ones in this tier. Um, where is he? Oh yeah, it's got good resistances with okay-ish base stats and in a very basic fierce moveset. It's not like a bad common, but it's below average for a common. It has its uses in common like formats, but there's better options like Ophiachodon, which we'll get to later on. Okay, next is Diplocalis Gentoo. This is another one of the weaker ones in this tier. This is basically Coolosuchus from the last episode, but better. It's got a bit more health, a little bit less speed, it still has Distraction Immune, and then it's got Instant Distraction, which is way better than Group Distraction, and it has a swap in. Otherwise, it is identical to Coolosuchus. It's still a really bad rare. Um, yeah, Ionogonodon. This is the weakest hybrid in the game. Um, yeah. It did get a little bit buffed in 2.14. They changed Resilient Impact to Group Resilient Impact, but that didn't really help. Um, so yeah, it's been the worst hybrid in the game since 2.9 came out when the Resilient change happened, because before that it at least beat things like Velociraptor and Electrogamma. Now it doesn't because it can't slow them down. However, now it does actually do a pretty good chunk of damage to things like Argentrix, and Sealhost and stuff like that, and actually it might even... Does it even... Does, no, it doesn't beat Sealhost, but it comes close. Um, I still don't think it's good. I still think it's the weakest hybrid in the game. It's just bad. It's a Hadrosaur. It's basically just a Montosaurus, but with extra stuff on it. A Montosaurus with less health, less speed, but swap prevention immune, and basically just an upgraded moveset. Still really bad. Anthodon. Anthodon is kind of similar to Bionics Gen 2, but a little different, and I would say slightly better. I'm looking for it. There it is. So it's definitely frailer, and it's got very similar speed, and it doesn't have decel immune, instead training it up for stun immune. But it does more damage, and it's got a group shattering impact. And I would say Mutual Fury is... I would say it's slightly better than Ready to Crush, mainly because the cleanse and the speed increase. But if it's better than Bionics Gen 2, it's very slight. Anthodon still sucks. Lithanax. This guy, I remember back in the old days of Jurassic World Alive when this guy was just a meme. It's another counterattacker, except this one actually has okay stats, or at least when it's got decent health for a non-hybrid counterattacker. Otherwise, still got low damage and speed. Low damage is expected because that's a counterattack. And it has lots of shields. Yeah. It's basically what you want, like what Margasaurus should be, is this. Still not very good, though. Mira Gaia, the other common counterattacker in this tier. Yeah, there's an epic one we'll get to later on in Survivor. Where is it? Mira Gaia. I remember back before 2.0, this was the best common in the game. This thing was absolutely amazing. Like, it had 117 speed, it had 1350 damage. It was so good. And now it's pretty dead by comparison. It's frail. Its base stats are horrendous. Its moveset's okay, though. Shield Decelerating Strike's really good. Emergency Heal's good. Decelerating Counter's good. It's just, if it had its old stats, it would be absolutely amazing, basically. Yeah, that's Mira Gaia. Notosaurus. Notosaurus is another pretty basic rare tank. I would say it's probably about the same in viability as Ankylosaurus. It trades tankiness for a little bit more output. It's got worse resistances, worse base damage, worse speed, worse health. But it has a multiplier, which is nice. It's still kind of bad. Anyways, Posteratosaurus. Posteratosaurus, one of the best in the tier. It's cunning. It's basically Monolophosaurus Gen 2, but better. It has a bit less base damage, but it's got a little bit more health, and it's got on top of Monolophosaurus Gen 2, so it's also got cunning impact. So yeah, it's basically just distraction spam. Pteranodon. This is the other counterattacker in Survivor. This is basically Tupendactylus, but better. There's another non-hybrid counterattacking pterosaur we'll get to in the beta tiers. That's better than both. So it's got more health, more speed, but less damage than Tupendactylus. It doesn't have that slight bit of vulnerability resistance, but that doesn't matter anyways. And it trades out the shield that Tupendactylus has for a fierce impact. I would say it's mainly better just because of the health advantage it has over Tupendactylus. Plus, it's got better turn 1 damage output. Basically, what you do with this guy, swap and Ferocity is useless on it. Don't swap in with it; it's just gonna die. Do fierce impact and impact everyone, and get counterattacks off in the process. And it's still one of the weakest epics in the game, though. It's still really bad. Yeah. Anyways, Parasaurus Gen 2, another common. This is basically just a common multiplier, like, burst damage guy. It's got reasonable stats. It's basically the strategy of this is mostly go vulnerability strike and then binding impact for a big hit on turn 2. Although it lacks distraction resistance and it can't cleanse distraction, so that might be an issue, and it also can't go through shields or dodge. And no escape's nice too. But generally, it just lacks any ways to deal with the damage-reducing things. And the last creature in Survivor tier is Centosaurus, another non-hybrid hadrosaur. But this one does stand out above the ones in the lower tiers. Obviously, there's a couple others that are higher that have their own gimmicks, which we'll get to. One we'll get to later in this episode, and one we'll get to next episode. So it's basically just, it's kind of similar to Para, but just better. It's got a little bit less health than Para, but a little bit more damage, a little bit more speed, and it has resistances, and decent resistances at that. And it has a better group heal move than Parasaurolophus, and then it has a multiplier here that it basically can do this, which will make it 1875, and then it can do group cleansing like afterwards to be a combo hit for 3750 in 2 turns, or it can heal. And I don't know what 1875 times 1.5 is, but it's like 28 something. But outside of that, it just doesn't do much. It's still not useful. It's just bad. The only reason I put it here is it's just better than all the other non-hybrid hadrosaurs that we've discussed so far. Because again, there's a couple others we'll get to later on. Anyways, moving on to low beta. Yeah, I split beta into 2 because when I was making the tier list revamp, it really just got crowded in beta tier. In fact, the only tier I think that might have been maybe a bit more crowded than it was... Actually, no, it would have been the most crowded tier. Although high alpha, low elite, and middle elite would come pretty close. Anyways, first one's a Margasaurus, which got slightly buffed with this update. It wasn't a direct buff, but it was a group distorting impact got its cooldown reduced, and now it can actually spam the multipliers. That was just barely enough to bring it from the top of Survivor into the very bottom of low beta. But honestly, I could see it being in either of the 2 tiers. Basically, it's just Apotasaurus, but rare. It's got less health and damage, a little bit more speed. Doesn't have distract resistance, but it can spam multipliers. Yeah, that's pretty basic. Diplocalis. This is one of the best creatures in this tier. It's a common. It's pretty frail. But it does good damage. And it's reasonably fast. And it's got distract immune. Basically, you just do null impact and maybe distraction next turn and just get off a nice 4,000 before you go down. Still not any good. Ionosaurus. This is the first, I think the first swap-in damage creature we have. The first true swapper. And I would say this is probably the weakest swapper in the game. Because a good amount of swappers aren't absolutely helpless after they come in. They at least have something to do besides heal and get out. This guy all it has is Resilient Strike and a heal. And its matchups are absolutely atrocious. Like, its matchups are about as bad as Iguanodon, or like they're basically almost as bad as pre 2.14 Iguanodon and Ethereum matchups. So yeah, basically, it's got basic Ceratopsian stats, which means it's not good stats, and a basic Ceratopsian swap remove set, except as dig in instead of heal. Or sorry, heal instead of dig in. I cannot talk today. Yeah, if it didn't have swap and stunning strike, it'd probably be Carcass. But yeah. Ethereum. The first rare hybrid. And yeah, it's really bad. It's worse than Inostrancevia, actually. Yeah, it's got frail, it's got good base damage and it's really fast, but that speed is actually a bit of a detriment to it. Because Mutual Fury with 131 speed is a horrible combination. And also the resistances aren't that great either. Like, where did all of Archethereum's resistances go on this guy? I mean, I get it got the Vuln immune and Decel immune after Ethereum was added, but still. Anyways, its moveset is pretty trash. Yeah, it's just bad. Centosaurus. Probably one of the worst creatures in this tier. It's bad stats and a really mediocre moveset. This already encounters nice, and Resilient Impact isn't bad either, but Group Disordering Strike is terrible. Not much more needs to be said about Centosaurus. I really wish they brought back the old version back when it was a beast. Diplocalis Gentoo. Yeah, it's basically Diplocalis, but not quite as terrible. It's got a lot more health, it's got a lot more base damage, only 1 less speed. It doesn't have the Distract immune, but that's not really enough to make it anywhere, like, near as bad as its epic counterpart. And its damage output, its turn 1 is about the same because it lacks multipliers, but its strike is the same as a Coolisukis impact. And then its turn 2 is better because all Coolisukis has turn 2 to do damage as a strike. And also, instant distraction is better than group distraction. Yeah, it's still kind of bad though. Yeah, at least it's better than its epic counterpart. It has that to its name. Alright, Mojon De Sukis. This is basically what happens when you take Margasaurus and just slap a bunch of extra moves on it. It's got the same health, the same damage, some more speed. It loses Margasaurus is, I think, has slight wound resistance. Yeah, it loses the slight wound resistance, which really doesn't matter anyways. And then it still has Resilient Strike and Taunting Shields. It just adds Ferocious Strike and Cleansing Impact on it. Now, this moveset is very good. This is a very nice moveset here. Its stats are just trash. If this thing had, like, 3,900 health and, like, 114 speed and maybe, like, 1,200 damage, this guy would probably be, like, at least mid-alpha, probably higher. In fact, no, he'd probably be high alpha, maybe even low elite. But its stats hold it back so hard. And give it some of Nundasukus' resistances. Like, where's the D-cell immune at? Yeah. Nundasukus is just bad. Sarcosuchus. Did I miss it? No, it's right there. It's a crocodile that's really not like the other ones because it's a bleeder. It just does lethal wound and then prevents things from swapping out, and that's all it does. Its stats are pretty bad. It's a basic swap preventing bleeder. Not much to say on it. Scaphognathus. This is basically the better version of Dimetrodon I talked about last time. And it's better in all but one way. Well, actually two. It's got one less speed, but that doesn't really matter. It's got same health, same damage. Oh yeah, it doesn't have Bending Strike either, so it does regular strike. But it's got heal, which is nice, and it's also got no escape. But it's still really bad. Like, this is one of the weakest creatures in the tier. If it didn't have no escape, it honestly might even be worse than Darwin. Well, maybe not worse, but it'd be almost as bad. But no escape allows for some pretty decent swap predicting maneuvers. Yeah. It's still pretty bad. Scaphitator. This is Scaphognathus' hybrid, and honestly, it's probably just as bad as Scaphognathus. Scaphitator, where is it? There it is. Diplocator is way better than it. So yeah, it's frail, it doesn't do much damage, it is fast, but it doesn't have Scaphognathus' no escape. Its heal is basically the same. It's still got swoop. It's got distracting impact, which is, I guess, pretty good, and Fierce Strike isn't too bad, but it just doesn't work. Like, it's so frail that swapping in and swapping wound is just a bad idea. Yeah. That's a swapping bleeder, and most of the time, those don't work. Schoolosaurus. This is the weakest legendary in the game. Schoolosaurus is definitely raid-oriented, but that doesn't make it any less terrible in PvP. This thing is so trash. Now you look at the stats and think, these are pretty decent stats. You look at the resistances, wow, these are pretty good resistances. But the moveset is terrible for PvP. All it has to do damage is Resilient Strike and Group Taunting Shield Strike. And then it has this move that's nice and raised, but absolutely terrible in PvP. And then Group Distraction is really bad too. It doesn't do anything. In fact, I don't even think it beats a single other legendary outside of maybe, like, Pokéday or something. But even then, I don't think it does. And it might beat Pokéday by just spamming Resilient Strike, but still. Oh, it's so bad. Legendaries don't deserve to be that terrible. Anyways, Spinous Raptor, another really trashy epic hybrid. Where is it? Yeah, it's worse than Spinosaurus and about as bad as Utahraptor. It is very frail. Its other two stats are fine, but its moveset is just a complete downgrade of its ingredients. Oh, it decided to inherit Utahraptor's really bad basic move instead of Spinosaurus' Fierce Strike. Oh, it decided to have Gashing Wound instead of Lethal Wound. Oh, it decided to have Distracting Impact instead of Pounce. or maybe you could even put Fierce Impact on here instead of one of these two, and put and like Fierce Impact plus Pounce, and then it doesn't even have Spinosaurus, no escape. It's such a letdown, honestly. Stuthiamimus. Yeah, Stuthiamimus is really bad. Like it's rare. The rare Ornithomimus is just so much better than Stuthiamimus. Frail, really slow for an Ornithomimid. Not really that good damage. Good resistances, I guess, but really, it's basically the same as the other ones because crit reduction resistance isn't very useful, and it shaves off a little bit of the swap prevention resistance. So it's basically the same, like same viability of resistances as Ornithomimus, and then its moveset's just worse. Evasive Strike is, Ornithomimus also has that, but it changes out Ornithomimus' instant distraction for group distraction, which is a complete downgrade. And Cutting Rampage versus Rampage and Run is a side grade. They both serve different roles. But it's just the combination of the worst stats and group distraction, then it just makes this thing really bad. It's the weakest of the Continental exclusives, and by a wide margin too. Well, yeah, by a wide margin. Yeah. I was thinking Centosaurus is one, but it's not. It just came out the same update. Anyways, Suchomimus. Much of what can be said about Sarcosuchus also applies here. Because this is basically just a changed up Sarcosuchus. It's got more base health, but slightly less effective HP because it doesn't have armor. Slower, doesn't have the vuln resistance, but it has Fear Strike, so it can break shields. Honestly, it's kind of hard to tell which is better. It really depends on your personal choice. I used to say Suchomimus is better, but now I think they're kind of tied. And even maybe Sarcosuchus is a little bit better, but yeah. It's a basic bleeder. Utahraptor. They're finally onto another raptor. Because the last one we were on was Dynaudicus. So yeah, very frail with good damage output and speed. That's a raptor. Strike's terrible. Pounce is good. Cutting Impact's fine. It just dies to swappers all the time, and its output isn't as good as some other raptors that you'll get to higher up. Well, actually, well, yeah. It's basically just a worse version of Charlie, honestly, and we'll get to Charlie later. Yeah, it's a basic raptor and not a good one either. And the last of low beta is Woolly Mammoth. Yeah. This is a shell of its former self. I remember back in the day, in 1.14 and before, when this thing was probably the best non-hybrid in the game. It was unbelievably good. It had 1400 base damage, had armor-piercing rampage instead of this group decelerating impact. It did absolutely monstrous amounts of damage. It was insane, and I absolutely miss using it. And then in 2.0, they basically ran it over the bus and threw it in the trash can. Completely mediocre to below average base stats. No useful resistances, and a pretty mediocre moveset. Persistent Ferocious Strike is one of the best basic moves in the game, and Group Distorting Impact's good. Taunting Bell not so much, but it just doesn't work with how low this thing's damage is. So yeah, it's... Poor Mammoth. Anyways, high beta. The last tier we'll be discussing in this video. Starting with Aramborgiania. I used to call it Aramborgiania, but I didn't know what I was doing. Aramborgiania. It's going to take a while to get used to saying that. It's like Hatsucopteryx, but better. It's got less, like, these two stats are a bit less, and it's only got one more speed, but it has Rampage and Run, and a shield, and a better swap-in. So it's just better. There's another large pterosaur that we'll get to later, that is basically like a more defensive version. Yeah, it's basically just all you do is just get in, like swap in, then shield, then rampage and run, or maybe resilient strike, then rampage and run. It's a below average rare though. It's really not very good. Brontotherium. This is, by the way, this tier is where we're starting to actually get to like the pretty decent commons. And Brontotherium fits the pretty decent common. I do think it's quite overrated because a lot of people say this common is like a top tier common. I don't think it is. Pretty average stats for a resilient. Decel immune's nice. Swap and defense kind of sucks, and but these other two moves are fine. Basically, it just spams these two moves. Does Resilient Strike, then the Shield, then Resilient Impact Shield, Resilient Impact Shield. It just cycles through that, and it's good against Cunnings, mixed against other tanks, bad against Chompers. It's a very typical tank. Swivel Seas. This is a weird one. This is added in 2.12, and it's basically just what the other two non-hybrid deers wish it would be, but it's still not that good. This one's also heavily overrated. Like, someone I know says this is better than Megalonyx. No. But yeah, it is frailer than the other two deer. It's got slightly less armor and slightly less health, but it has a lot more damage. Basically the same speed. And it's got better resistances. It's D-cell immune. It doesn't have as much swap event resistance or vuln resistance, but it also has distract immune. So this is the first creature to have both distraction and D-cell immune. The first of two now, because Alphasaurus got buffed. Anyways, its moveset's also alright, I guess. Resilient Strike's good, Dig In's good, Shield Destroying Impact's good, Swap and Heal's not good. If it had better stats, it would be a beast. Like, if this thing 4,200 health, keep the damage and speed, then it would be amazing. Probably not amazing, but it'd be very good. It'd probably be at least high alpha. Alright, Charlie. Utahraptor, but better. That's really all it is. It's got a bit less health, but otherwise it's more damage, faster, and an identical moveset. Next. Delta, another raptor. I'd say this one's worse than Charlie, but of course better than Utahraptor because it's in a higher tier. It's got more health than Charlie, but worse damage output, faster, and basically it changes out Cunning Impact for Impact and Run, which is a side grade. But I'd say for a raptor, Cunning Impact's better, because you're not really going to get this Impact and Run off too often, mostly because swappers exist. Yeah. We'll get to the last of the 4 rare raptors in just a little bit. Dilophosaurus Gentoo. This is a common, a very strange common, because it is frail, like very frail, and its speed is very low for a cunning, but then when you look at its damage, it's just ridiculous. And it's got distraction immune too, so unless you have a shield, armor, or dodge, you're not reducing that damage. And its moveset is kind of bad, honestly. Impact sucks, but it works for what it is because all I do at turn 1 is an impact and just smash whatever chomper you're facing to bits, and then die to whatever comes in next. Yeah, like Velo annihilates this thing, Velociraptor. Overall, it's basically just a min-maxed common cunning. It's not too bad though for a common. Ionosaurus. This is the best of the non-hybrid like medium counter-attacking pterosaurs. It's got the most health, the most damage, the least speed, but that doesn't really matter, and definitely the best moveset. It's basically its moveset is about the same as Pteranodon's, except it changes out Impact and Run for Ferocious Strike, and Ferocious Strike works well with a counter-attacker like this. Because it just lasts for so long. If it was Group Frosty Strike, this guy would be pretty bad, but now it's just a below average rare instead of a bad rare. Obviously it's obviously not good, like it could really use some more health, but it's on the right track. Echo, the last of the 4 rare raptors. I would say this is probably about Delta's level. In fact, probably tied with Delta. It's got same health as Charlie, in between Utahraptor and Delta in damage, in between Charlie and Utahraptor in speed. But its moveset is pretty good. Precise Pounce, it's the only one of the of the rare raptors to have Precise Pounce. And Cleansing Impact, which honestly it really only is good against things that have like priority distraction moves. Because you're really fast, so you're not going to be cleansing much else, and you're really frail, so if you're going to be slowed down, then you're just going to die next turn or swap out. But overall, it's still a below average rare, but not a bad one. Eupocephalus, another decent common tank. It's got, like, the main 3 base stats on it are pretty bad, but 40% armor is really good, and it's got a pretty nice moveset. You do Sphere of Vulnerability and then chain it to Rampage. That's 3,600 in 2 turns, which for a tank like this is not bad. But there are basically 2 better versions of this that we'll get to in the next episode, which are Scolosaurus and Glyptodon. Of course, both of which are commons. Griposuchus, another epic. This one isn't like the Sarcosuchus that we've discussed before. Really, it's more similar to Posteratosaurus Gen 2, but even then, it's not very similar to that either. It's kind of its own thing. Um, Mostly because it doesn't have vulnerability like the Posterosauruses have. So base stats, all three of the base stats are all average, and it's got, I guess these two are okay. Lacks resistances, and its moveset's not very good. Immobilize is fine on something that actually that you want to like. If this thing had a move that you wanted to stall for, Immobilize would be good, but it doesn't work on this. If it had like, honestly, Binding Impact would probably be better on it, even though it's usually a worse move. Because Ferocious Strike into that would be good. But no. Garbazukas is pretty weak for an epic. Ferocious Strike is good, it's just not in the right creature. And of course, No Escape's nice. Host Eagle, the newly buffed Host Eagle. So I'll just give a rundown of what they basically changed just two things on this. They changed out Evasive Strike to Cunning Strike, and then changed Distraction to Distracting Impact. So now it actually has an impact, like a multiplier. Otherwise, they kept it's still really frail, which is why it's not any higher than it is. And its damage output's still not very good, but its damage output isn't atrocious anymore. And it's still, I was going to say it's the fastest creature in the game, but there's a new one added that's faster, which we'll get to in the next episode. But yeah, it's still incredibly fast. Fearless Slap's still great. It just needs more health. If this had like 3450 health maybe, then it'd probably be mid-alpha. But there's another eagle also that we'll get to next episode that's better than it. But yeah, definitely improved over its old self. It would probably be in Survivor if it didn't get buffed. Alright, Irritator Gen 2. This is the another swapper we're getting to. This is definitely the outlier among its like the small Spinosaurid group, because it's a swapper. Its health and damage are pretty bad, and its speed's also on the lower end for its family. But it has Swap Indefinite Strike. It's also the only creature to swap Indefinite Strike, which I find funny. And I can follow up with Ferocious Strike. It's not going to do all that much, but you really just use this for the swap in. Yeah. It's a fierce swapper. Myosora. This is the third best non-hybrid Hadrosaur. Second best if you don't count Parasaurolophus Lux. And I don't count Hadros Lux as a non-hybrid, even though it technically is. So yeah, it's the frailest Hadrosaur. It is extremely frail, but it's got good base damage and good speed, and then its main selling point is Instant Rampage. Basically, what you do with this is Instant Rampage and then die. That's all Myosora does. Otherwise, the rest of the set's clearly unremarkable and basic Hadrosaur stuff. Yeah. Can't really say much more. Alphasaurus. It's basically just Posteratosaurus, but upgraded. It's got a bit more same health and damage and a bit more speed than Posteratosaurus, and then it basically changes out Distracting Impact for Distracting Rampage. So you do Cunning Impact and then Distracting Rampage and then Cunning Impact, and yeah, that's basically its 3-turn combo. Distraction Spam. Yeah, it's a Cunning. What do you expect? There's a better one we'll get to in the next episode, though. Alright, Ophiachodon. This is what I was talking about when I said that this is just a straight upgrade of, well, a near straight upgrade of Dimetrodon Gen 2. It's got a little bit less health, and it's slower, but it's got a lot more damage, and a much higher crit chance, and basically the same resistances. I would say it's better, just because I think this one actually beats Glyptodon, and the other one, does Dimetrodon Gen 2 beat Glyptodon? I can't remember. I don't think it does, but it, no, yeah, it does, but this guy does it in 2 hits, and Dimetrodon Gen 2 does it in 3. Yeah, it's a Sphenacodon common. Yeah. Quetzalcoatlus. This is the other rare large pterosaur. This one is the defensive one, because it has a lot of health. Otherwise, its base stats unremarkable. Resilient Strike's fine, Taunting Shield's fine, Impact and Run fine, Stop and Defense, eh. Really, it's just, its main selling point is it being an absolute tank with that health. Yeah. Really, it's worse than a Rambor, but it's still they're both still below average rares. It's really not too much to be, like, really not too much to look at. Rajasaurus. This is basically just a better version of Lithanax. I missed it. It's up here. There it is. So, basically, it's got the exact same base stats as Lithanax, but a higher crit chance. And then it's got a very similar moveset. It has shield spam like Lithanax, but it's also got Resilient Strike. It's just, yeah, it's just epic Lithanax. Okay. Cyanoseropteryx. This is the first flock. And the only flock in this episode. Yeah, it's the worst flock in the game. But it's an okay common. This is deceptive. It's a flock, so it's really not frail. Really frail. The damage kind of sucks though. It's fast. This isn't really that useful for it, and it's distraction and pounds. So really, its moveset is a lot like a Raptor's moveset. But yeah, it has no way to heal itself, and its damage output sucks. If it wasn't a flock, then it would be trash. Tarbosaurus. This is the first true chomper we're getting to. Yeah, it's good health, very good damage, and really low speed with a very good crit chance. And then you just do Fear Strike. It's got Fear Strike, Armor Piercing Impact, basic chomper moves. Allosaurus is basically a straight upgrade, though, and we'll get to Allosaurus in the next episode. Yeah. It's a chomper. A common chomper. Dragonissus. This is the second worst legendary in the game. It is better than Skulosaurus. It's basically got the same health and damage. It is a lot slower, but it has a bit more armor, and this is probably worse, but its moveset's better. Spear of Vulnerabilities, no matter how you put it, it's definitely better than Resilient Strike now. Group Disheartening Strike is really bad, but honestly, it's at least a group move, which is something that Skulosaurus doesn't have. And it has a heal unlike Skulosaurus, and its chill move is priority. It is still a terrible legendary. It's just not as bad as Skulosaurus. Anyways. Next is Triceratops, which is our next swapper. Triceratops is one of the best in this tier. But yeah, it's really basic, trashy Ceratopsian stats. And then it's a basic Ceratopsian moveset. You have your Resilient Strike, that's basically obligatory in most non-hybrid Ceratopsians. Dig In, which is also in most non-hybrid Ceratopsians. Actually, no, it's not even half in non-hybrid Ceratopsians, never mind. Greater Stunning Strike, and Swap and Stunning Strike, of course. Of course, if it didn't have Swap and Stunning Strike, it'd be trash. It'd probably be Scavenger at best, and probably Hatchling. But Swap and Stunning Strike, of course, keeps it from being terrible. It's still not good. There are, like, multiple rare swappers that are better. If you bring hybrids into it, then Ionosaurus is better. And if you bring non-hybrids, then Utahraptor and Dracorex. And there's even a couple common swappers that are better than this. Dracorex Gentoo and Triceratops Gentoo. And Ionosaurus. Ionosaurus is basically just an upgraded version of Centosaurus. It's got, it's slower, but otherwise the base stats are the same. And then it has Precise Rampage instead of Resilient Impact, which I'd say is an upgrade. Swap and Solo doesn't really matter, though. Basically, its main thing is it does 3,000 on turn 1. And then it could follow up with, I guess, like a Resilient Strike or something to set up for a swap. It's still, of course, a pretty weak rare. And Warhosaurus, which is the other rare Stegosaur, probably about the same viability as Ionosaurus, just fills a different role. It's not a counterattacker, and its base stats are a lot better. It just doesn't have the counterattack. Group Distorting Rampage is nice. It can, like, it can fight against the flocks, especially Compy Gen 2. It might even beat Compy Gen 2, or at least come close. And, yeah. It's a group attacking tank. And that ends it for the low tiers. Um, you should probably expect the mid tiers episode to be released tomorrow. I hope you guys enjoyed. Subscribe and like if you want. And I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.